In 1933, a mother of 5 in rural Oklahoma fed her entire family for 7 days on 43 cents. She did not skip meals. She did not send the children to bed hungry. She cooked 3 times a day using recipes that had no names, only survival behind them. Number 11 on this list kept an entire coal mining town alive through the winter of 1934. Number 6 was so common during the Depression that it showed up in every state, every county, every kitchen where the money had stopped and the hunger had not. And number 2 was invented by a woman who had nothing left in her pantry but 3 ingredients most people today would throw away. These were not sad meals. These were brilliant meals, engineered by desperate people who refused to let their families go without. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten Great Depression meals that poor families loved and that we desperately need back. Number 25. Water, gravy, and bread. When there was no meat, no milk, and no butter, there was still flour, water, and a spoonful of saved grease. Mothers heated whatever fat they had in a skillet, stirred in flour until it browned, and then added water slowly, whisking until a thin gravy formed. Salt and pepper. That was it. Poured over a slice of day-old bread, it became supper. The fat gave it body. The flour gave it weight. The bread, you soaked it up and turned soft and warm in the bowl. A 5-pound bag of flour cost about 23 cents in 1932. That bag could make gravy for weeks. Families in the rural South and across the Dust Bowl states survived on this meal more nights than anyone cared to count. Today it sounds like nothing. In 1933, it was everything. It was the difference between going to bed with something in your stomach and going to bed empty. Every bite said someone in this house still had the strength to cook. Number 24. Potato soup. Not the creamy, butter-loaded version from modern cookbooks. Depression. Potato soup was potatoes, water, an onion if you had one, and salt. You boiled the potatoes until they fell apart and mashed some of them right in the pot to thicken the broth. If there was a scrap of bacon grease in the can on the stove, a spoonful went in at the end. That changed everything. It added a ghost of smokiness that made the whole pot taste richer than it was. A 10-pound bag of potatoes cost about 17 cents at a roadside stand in 1934. That bag could make soup for a week and a half. Mothers fed their families on this without apology. The soup was hot, it was filling, and it asked nothing of a kitchen that had almost nothing to give. Number 23. Hoover stew. Named with bitter irony after President Herbert Hoover, who many blamed for the Depression itself, Hoover stew was the meal that showed up in shanty towns and relief kitchens from coast to coast. It was made from cooked macaroni, a can of stewed tomatoes, and a sliced hot dog if you could afford one. Everything went into one pot. The hot dogs were the luxury. When they were not available, the macaroni and tomatoes stood alone and still made a meal. The name was an insult turned into dinner. Hoovervilles, Hoover blankets, Hoover stew. People named their misery after the man they held responsible and then sat down to eat it. Families across the industrial Midwest ate this 2 or 3 nights a week, and they did not complain because complaining required energy they did not have. A box of macaroni cost a nickel. A can of tomatoes was 8 cents. Number 22. Dandelion greens salad. Before lawns became status symbols, dandelions were groceries. Mothers sent children into yards and fields to pick the youngest, most tender leaves before the plants flowered. The greens were washed, torn, and dressed with hot bacon grease and a splash of vinegar. The fat wilted the leaves instantly, and the vinegar cut the bitterness into something almost pleasant. Dandelions cost nothing. They grew everywhere, in sidewalk cracks, along railroad tracks, in vacant lots where factories had closed. Nutritionists now know that dandelion greens contain more iron and calcium than spinach. Depression-era families did not know that. They knew the greens were free, and they were green, and the children needed something besides starch. That was enough. Number 21, beans and cornbread. This was the backbone of Depression survival across the South, the Ozarks, and half of Appalachia. 1 pound of dried pinto beans soaked overnight, then simmered all day with a piece of salt pork or fatback until the beans turned creamy and the pot liquor thickened into a dark, smoky broth. Cornbread baked in a cast-iron skillet, golden and cracking at the edges, was served alongside for crumbling and sopping. Dried pintos cost about 6 cents a pound. Cornmeal cost 4 cents. Salt pork cost a dime. This pot fed a family of 6 for 2 full days. The beans provided protein, fiber, and iron. The cornbread provided warmth and satisfaction. Together they were complete in a way that no single ingredient could be alone. Families ate this 5 nights a week without variation, because variation was a luxury and survival was not. Number 20, Depression lemonade. When real lemons were out of reach, mothers made lemonade from vinegar, sugar, and water. A tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in a glass of water with a spoonful of sugar created something tart and sweet enough to pass for a cold drink on a sweltering afternoon. Children drank it without knowing the difference. The vinegar provided the same acidic bite that citrus would have, and the sugar masked what the vinegar could not hide. A bottle of vinegar cost about 10 cents and lasted for months. This was not a recipe born from creativity. It was born from the absence of everything else. Mothers stood in kitchens with nothing in the cupboard and invented a way to make their children smile. Number 19, fried cornmeal mush. Cornmeal boiled in water and salt until it set into a thick porridge, poured into a loaf pan, and left to cool overnight. In the morning, the solidified mush was sliced a 1/4 inch thick and pan-fried in whatever grease was available until each side crisped golden brown. Served with a drizzle of molasses or a scrape of butter, it was breakfast, lunch, or supper, depending on the hour and the desperation. Cornmeal cost 4 cents a pound. Molasses was 15 cents a quart. A loaf of fried mush could feed a family for 3 mornings. The outside crackled between the teeth. The inside stayed soft and warm. Men heading to WPA work sites carried cold slices, wrapped in newspaper, and ate them on the job. It was fuel, plain, reliable, and cheap enough that even the poorest kitchen could produce it without thinking. Number 18, milk toast. A slice of bread, toasted until just golden, placed in a bowl, topped with a pat of butter, and drowned in warm milk. That was the entire recipe. Mothers made it for sick children, for exhausted husbands, for themselves on nights when standing at the stove felt impossible. The toast softened in the warm milk and turned into something almost like bread pudding, simple and comforting in a way that nothing complicated could match. Milk cost about 10 cents a quart in the early 1930s. Bread was a few cents a loaf. The butter was the extravagance, and many families skipped it entirely. Without butter, it was still warm, still filling, still something. Hospitals served milk toast to patients well into the 1960s because it was gentle on the stomach and easy to eat. Depression families served it because sometimes gentle was all they could manage. Number 17, poor man's meal. The name was honest in Depression kitchens. Potatoes sliced thin, fried in a skillet with diced onions and whatever scraps of hot dog or bologna could be found. Everything cooked together, until the potatoes crisped at the edges and the onions turned sweet and golden. One pot, one burner, maybe 20 cents worth of ingredients for a family of 4. The potatoes carried the weight. The onions carried the flavor. The scrap meat made it feel like something more than just survival. Men who grew up eating poor man's meal during the Depression remembered it decades later with strange affection. It was not the taste they remembered, it was the fact that somebody made it for them. Number 16, egg drop soup. A pot of boiling water, a pinch of salt, and 1 egg. That was the recipe when there was truly nothing else. You beat the egg and poured it in a thin stream into the boiling water and watched the protein set into golden ribbons floating through what was essentially flavored water. If you had a bouillon cube, the soup improved dramatically. If you had a handful of rice, even better. But the base version, water and egg, still provided protein and warmth and the feeling of having eaten a meal. Eggs cost about 29 cents a dozen in 1933. 1 egg was less than 3 cents. This soup cost almost nothing and took less than 5 minutes. For a mother feeding children alone while her husband rode freight trains looking for work, 5 minutes and 3 cents might have been all she had. First, pattern break. Here is what modern food historians consistently overlook about Depression cooking. These meals were not failures. They were engineering. Every recipe on this list solved a specific problem with the fewest possible resources. The women who created them were running calculations in their heads every single day. How many mouths? How many days until the next relief check? How many cups of flour in the bin? How many meals that flour could become? They were not following recipes. They were solving equations. And the answers they found were so effective that when the economy recovered and grocery stores filled back up, the food industry had to spend decades convincing Americans to stop cooking this way. Because a family that knows how to eat well on almost nothing is a family that does not need frozen dinners, boxed mixes, or canned soup at 40 cents a tin. Number 15, chipped beef on toast. Thin slices of dried, salted beef were torn into strips and stirred into a white sauce made of flour, grease, and milk, then poured over toast. The military called it something unprintable. Civilian families called it Tuesday. The dried beef came in small glass jars that cost about 15 cents, and they lasted for several meals. The salt in the beef seasoned the sauce without anything extra. The toast soaked everything up and turned soft under the weight of the gravy. Veterans who came home from the First World War brought this recipe into kitchens across the country. Their wives kept making it through the Depression because it was cheap and because the men asked for it. It reminded them that they had survived worse. A jar of dried beef and a loaf of bread could feed a family dinner for 2 nights. Number 14, rice pudding, leftover rice, an egg, a splash of milk, a spoonful of sugar, and a dusting of cinnamon, mixed together in a baking dish and baked slowly in the oven until it set into a creamy, warm custard. Rice cost about 5 cents a pound. The egg was 3 cents. Mothers made this from the leftover rice from supper because throwing food away was a sin that ranked alongside stealing in a house that had known hunger. Children ate it warm for dessert or cold the next morning for breakfast. The cinnamon on top was the flourish, the tiny gesture that said, this was not scraps. This was something made for you. Number 13, mock apple pie. This recipe appeared on the back of Ritz cracker boxes starting in the 1930s, and it fooled almost everyone who ate it. Crushed Ritz crackers were layered into a pie crust with sugar, cinnamon, lemon juice, and butter, then baked until golden. The crackers softened and dissolved into something that genuinely tasted like cooked apples. The combination of the buttery crackers, the acid from the lemon juice, and the warm spice tricked the tongue into believing it was eating fruit. When apples cost more than a family could spend on an entire meal, this pie offered the idea of abundance without the cost. Guests at church socials ate slices without realizing there was not a single apple in the dish. The recipe was not a joke. It was a small miracle performed with 5-cent ingredients. Number 12. Creamed peas on toast, a home economics staple. A can of peas drained and stirred into a simple white sauce of butter, flour, and milk, then poured over toast. It sounds plain because it was plain, but it was also hot, and it provided a vegetable that children would actually eat because the cream sauce made everything taste better. A can of peas cost about 8 cents. The white sauce came together from pantry staples in 3 minutes. Mothers across the Midwest and the Northeast made this on weeknights when the meal plan had run out, but the week had not. It appeared in home economics textbooks and extension service pamphlets distributed to struggling families by county agents. The government literally taught people to make this because it was nutritious enough to matter and cheap enough to be realistic. Number 11. Coal miners' stew. In the mining towns of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky, this stew kept families alive through winters when the mines shut down and the paychecks stopped. Potatoes, cabbage, an onion, and a chunk of salt pork or fatback simmered in water until everything turned soft and the broth thickened from the starch of the breaking potatoes. The cabbage added bulk and vitamins. The salt pork added depth that plain vegetables could not achieve alone. A whole pot cost maybe 15 cents and fed a family for 2 days. Mining wives made it in cast iron pots on coal stoves fired by the same coal their husbands had pulled from the earth. The stew kept entire communities standing through the worst years of the Depression. When mines reopened, families kept making it because they had learned to trust it. Number 10. Wacky cake. Also called depression cake or crazy cake, this was the chocolate cake that required no eggs, no butter, and no milk. Flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, vinegar, vanilla, vegetable oil, and water. Everything mixed directly in the baking pan. No bowl to wash. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to create lift. The oil kept the crumb moist. The result was a tender, deeply chocolate cake that tasted far better than its ingredients suggested. The recipe spread through women's circles and church groups like a secret weapon. A whole cake cost about 12 cents to make. Mothers baked it for birthdays, for Sunday dinner, for no reason at all, except that children deserved chocolate cake even when the world said they could not have it. Second pattern break. Here is the part that should make you angry. Nearly every meal on this list costs less to make today, adjusted for inflation, than what most Americans spend on a single fast food combo. A pot of bean soup that feeds 6 people costs roughly $3 in a modern grocery store. A fast food meal for 1 person costs $10. The math has not changed since 1933. What changed is that we stopped teaching people how to cook. Home economics classes disappeared from schools. Grandmothers who knew these recipes died without passing them down because their children were embarrassed by poverty food. And the food industry filled that gap with products that cost more, that nourish less, and that come in boxes designed by psychologists to make you feel like cooking from scratch is too hard. It is not too hard. It was never too hard. A 10-year-old girl in Oklahoma in 1934 could make bean soup. The lie that cooking is difficult is the most profitable lie the food industry ever told. Number 9. Oatmeal soup. When even potatoes were scarce, Oatmeal thickened a pot of water into something that resembled soup. Oats, an onion, salt, and water. That was the recipe. The oats dissolved as they cooked, creating a thick, starchy broth that sat heavy in the stomach and kept hunger away for hours. Some families added a spoonful of saved bacon grease for flavor. Some added nothing. Oats cost about 4 cents a pound, making this one of the cheapest meals in the American kitchen. It appeared in Salvation Army cookbooks and relief kitchen menus from New York to California. The taste was bland, almost aggressively plain, but it was warm. And on a January night in a house with no heat, warm was worth more than flavor. Number 8. Stuffed cabbage rolls. A head of cabbage cost a nickel and could become the centerpiece of a meal that looked like it belonged on a Sunday table. Mothers peeled the outer leaves carefully and blanched them until soft. Then they filled them with a mixture of rice, a small amount of ground meat when available, onion, and seasoning. The rolls were packed into a pot, covered with canned tomatoes, and simmered until everything melded together. The cabbage acted as wrapper, vegetable, and flavor all at once. The rice stretched whatever meat there was into enough filling for a dozen rolls. Immigrant families from Poland, Hungary, and Ukraine brought this technique to American kitchens, and Depression poverty made it universal. A pot of cabbage rolls for under 20 cents fed a family for dinner and provided lunch the next day. Number 7. Depression fried bologna. Before Oscar Mayer made it a lunchbox staple, bologna was the cheapest meat available at the butcher counter, about 12 cents a pound. Mothers cut thick slices, scored the edges, and fried them in a hot skillet until the meat blistered and curled. Served between slices of bread with mustard or on a plate next to fried potatoes, this was a hot meal that cost almost nothing and took 5 minutes to prepare. In factory towns across Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, the smell of frying bologna at 5:30 in the evening was as common as the sound of the shift whistle. Men ate it without comment. Children ate it gladly. The searing heat transformed something ordinary into something that felt deliberate, like a proper cooked supper, not just cold cuts on bread. Number 6. Flour and water pancakes. When the eggs were gone and the milk was gone, and nothing was left but a sack of flour, mothers still made breakfast. Flour, water, a pinch of salt, and a scrape of grease in the pan. The pancakes were flat, dense, and nothing like the fluffy stacks in restaurant windows. But they were hot, they filled bellies, and they meant that someone in the house was still fighting. A drizzle of molasses or a spoonful of jam on top was a feast. Families from the Dust Bowl states to the tenement blocks of the Lower East Side survived on these when every other option had been exhausted. This was the last meal before hunger. The fact that it existed, that mothers could conjure something from almost nothing, was the Depression's quiet daily miracle. Number 5. Navy bean soup. A pound of dried navy beans, an onion, a bay leaf, and water. If there was a ham bone, it went in. If there was not, the soup was made without it, and it still worked. The beans simmered for hours, breaking apart at the edges, thickening the broth into something rich and creamy without a drop of cream. A pound of dried beans cost about 8 cents. The entire pot fed a large family for 2 days. This was the meal that relief agencies distributed recipes for because the ingredients were available, the technique was forgiving, and the nutrition was real. Senate bean soup, essentially the same recipe, has been served in the United States Capitol every single day for over a century. Senators ate it, sharecroppers ate it. It made no distinctions. It simply fed whoever sat down. Number 4. Bread pudding. Stale bread was never wasted during the Depression. It was torn into pieces, soaked in a mixture of milk, egg, sugar, and vanilla, then baked until the top turned golden and the inside set into a soft custard. The bread absorbed everything and transformed from something dry and forgotten into something warm and sweet, worth sitting down for. Mothers made this from the heels and crusts that had dried out on the counter, ingredients that cost nothing because they had already been paid for. A spoonful of jam or a pour of warm milk over the top made it dessert. Without those additions, it was still a meal. The recipe showed up in every state, every community, every kitchen where bread went stale faster than it could be eaten. It was proof that nothing had to be thrown away if you knew what to do with it. Number 3, potato pancakes. Grated raw potatoes mixed with a little flour, an egg if you had one, salt, and fried in a skillet until the edges turned lacy and crispy. These were a frugal dinner across German, Irish, Polish, and Jewish households during the Depression, and they cost almost nothing. The potatoes released starch as they cooked, binding the pancake together without needing much flour. Served with applesauce, sour cream, or just plain with salt, they were satisfying in a way that defied their simplicity. A mother could grate 5 potatoes and feed her family a hot meal in 20 minutes. The technique crossed every ethnic boundary because potatoes did not care where your grandparents came from. They just fed you. Third, pattern break. Here is what we lost that matters most. Depression-era cooking was not about deprivation. It was about intelligence. Every recipe was a solution. Every meal was an answer to a problem that would have broken people who did not know how to use a stove. The women who cooked through those years were not victims of their kitchens. They were masters of them. They understood ratios without measuring cups. They understood chemistry without textbooks. They understood nutrition without labels. And when the Depression ended and prosperity arrived and grocery stores filled with convenience products wrapped in bright packaging, those women were told that their cooking was something to be ashamed of, something to leave behind. The food industry needed them to forget so they could be sold what they already knew how to make. And it worked. We forgot. Number 2, desperation pie. When a mother opened her cupboard and found nothing but flour, butter, sugar, and a little vanilla, she could still make pie. The filling was essentially a sugar custard, mixed in minutes and poured into a simple crust. It baked into something golden, sweet, and surprisingly elegant for a recipe born from having almost nothing. Some versions added vinegar for tang, some a dusting of nutmeg. But the base recipe required only what was already there. This pie appeared under a dozen names across the country: sugar pie, chess pie, water pie. Every region claimed it. Every version told the same story. A woman looked at an empty pantry and decided her family would still have dessert. That decision, that refusal to surrender the small joys, was the most Depression-era thing there was. Number 1, Depression soup. Garlic, potatoes, an onion, maybe a carrot, and water. The simplest possible soup made in the simplest possible way. Everything cut rough and boiled in one pot until the potatoes collapsed and thickened the water into something that felt like a meal. There was no meat, there was no stock, there was no cream. There was only what could be afforded, and what could be afforded was this. A single pot cost pennies and fed a family dinner and lunch the next day. Mothers made this thousands of times across millions of kitchens during the worst economic disaster in American history. It had no real recipe. It had no name beyond what it was. It was just soup, made by someone who loved the people sitting at the table enough to boil water when boiling water was all that was left. And that is what makes it the most important meal on this list. Not because it tasted good, but because it existed at all. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. The navy bean soup, the wacky cake, or the potato pancakes. Pick the one that sounds like something your great-grandmother might have made and try it. Then come back and tell me if it was as bad as you expected. I made the bread pudding from stale rolls last Sunday, and my kids asked for seconds. Drop which one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if desperation pie gets more love than coal miner's stew, because these are not just old recipes. They are proof that the smartest cooking in American history came from the people who had the least.